When I first met Claire, she was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. Sharp, unapologetically confident, and stunning in that all-American kind of way, blonde hair, blue eyes, a figure that made heads turn. She had me wrapped around her finger from the moment we locked eyes at that coffee shop on Fifth Avenue. She had her quirks, sure. A sharp tongue that could cut glass, and a stubbornness that would make a mule seem flexible. But to me, those were features, not flaws. We got married 2 years later in a vineyard in Napa Valley. It was the kind of wedding that made people whisper fairy tale. Claire planned every detail, from the delicate white roses draped over the arbor to the vintage photo booth she insisted on having. My dad, Roger, was my best man. I'd always been close to him, maybe too close. He was the guy who taught me how to swing a bat, change a tire, and throw a punch if I ever needed to. Things were good for the first few years. At least, that's what I told myself. Claire had a way of getting under people's skin, not just mine. She had a knack for needling people, especially Roger. At family dinners, she'd drop little jabs about his old-school way of thinking or his taste in wine. He'd always respond with a grin and some self-deprecating remark, but there was tension there. Looking back, maybe I should have seen it for what it was. The first sign that something was off came at one of our annual family barbecues. It was a warm summer evening, and Claire was at her best, hosting, laughing, charming everyone. But when I looked over at her and my dad, I noticed something odd. They were standing a little too close, talking in hushed tones. Roger's hand brushed her arm, and she laughed. Not her usual laugh, but that soft, almost shy one she used when she wanted something. I brushed it off at the time. They were just being friendly, right? Roger had always been good with people, and Claire could charm the pants off anyone. But then there were the little things. Like how Claire suddenly started going out more, claiming she needed me time at the spa or wine nights with her friends. Or how Roger would drop by our house unannounced, always with some flimsy excuse about needing a tool or checking on the lawnmower. And then there were the silences. Those heavy, loaded silences that filled the room whenever the three of us were together. One night, as I was lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Claire was in the bathroom, scrolling through her phone. Her face was lit up by the screen, and she was smiling. Not the kind of smile you give your husband when you're lying next to him, but the kind you give when you're getting away with something. I tried to shake the thought, but it burrowed into my brain like a splinter. The next day, I found myself replaying every interaction between Claire and Roger. The way she laughed at his jokes, even the lame ones. The way his eyes lingered on her just a second too long. The way she'd suddenly leave the room whenever he called. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was instinct. Either way, I couldn't let it go. A week after that barbecue, I decided to push the nagging feeling out of my head. I told myself it was nothing. People get paranoid sometimes, right? Marriage is built on trust, and Claire was my wife. If I couldn't trust her, what was the point? But then came the text. It was a Saturday morning, and Claire was in the shower. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand next to me, the screen lighting up with a preview of the message. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about it. No name, just a phone number. My chest tightened, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I stared at the message for what felt like hours, debating whether to open it. She'd know I had looked. But then again, wasn't that better than ignoring it? My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone and unlocked it. Claire's passcode was easy, our anniversary. I scrolled through her messages, but the thread was gone. She must have deleted it. I checked her call log and found the same number listed there several times over the past few weeks. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I copied the number into my own phone and decided to do some digging. That night, I lay awake while Claire slept soundly beside me. My mind was racing. Who could it be? Someone from work? A friend? I felt like a detective in one of those cheap crime dramas, obsessing over the smallest details. The next day, I called the number from a burner app on my phone. It rang a few times before going to voicemail. The generic, robotic voice said, "You've reached Roger. Leave a message." I froze. Roger. My dad. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My own father? No, it couldn't be. There had to be some kind of mistake. But then I thought about the way Claire and Roger acted around each other, the tension, the glances. It all started to make sense. For a moment, I wanted to pretend I hadn't made the call. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was another Roger. But deep down, I knew the truth. The next time I saw my dad was at our usual Sunday lunch. Claire cooked, as always, her famous honey-glazed salmon with roasted asparagus. She was in high spirits, laughing and joking with Roger like nothing was wrong. I watched them closely, looking for cracks, for any sign of guilt. And I saw it. It was subtle, but it was there. The way Claire's hand brushed against Roger's when she handed him the breadbasket. The way he avoided my eyes when I asked about his weekend. They were careful, but not careful enough. I didn't say anything during lunch. Instead, I waited until Claire went to the kitchen to get dessert. That's when I leaned in and whispered to my dad, "We need to talk." Alone. Roger's face went pale. He nodded, setting down his glass of wine. We met at a local park later that evening. It was quiet, with only a few joggers and dog walkers around. I leaned against a bench, arms crossed, as Roger approached. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice calm but guarded. "You know what it's about?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. Roger sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Ethan, if this is about..." "Don't..." I cut him off. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know." There was a long silence. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe, or regret. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "Then what is it?" I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife and my father have been sneaking around behind my back. Roger opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He just stood there looking at me like he was searching for the right thing to say. I couldn't take it anymore. "How long?" I asked. "How long has this been going on?" He hesitated, then said softly, "A few months." "A few months." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt sick, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this to me?" Roger looked away, his jaw tight. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." "That's not good enough," I snapped. "You're my father. You're supposed to have my back, not stab me in it." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I screwed up, but I love her, Ethan. I didn't plan it, but I do." I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I walked through the door, Claire was waiting for me, her arms crossed. "Where have you been?" she asked, her tone accusatory. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I fell in love with. I saw a stranger. "I talked to my dad," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, so you two are gossiping about me now?" "Don't do that," I said. "Don't act like I'm the bad guy here." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But it's cute that you and Roger are having your little bonding moments." I stepped closer, my voice low and cold. "I know, Claire. I know about the texts, the calls. I know about the two of you." For a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt. But then she laughed. Actually laughed. "You're insane," she said, shaking her head. "You've always been insecure, Ethan, but this is a new low." "I saw the text," I said, my voice rising. "I called the number." "Don't lie to me." She crossed her arms, a smug smile on her face. "So what if I texted him? He's your dad. We talk. It's called being friendly." "Friendly?" I snapped. "That's what you call it?" Her expression hardened. "You know what your problem is? You're always looking for something to be mad about. Maybe if you focus more on being a husband and less on playing detective, we wouldn't be having this conversation." I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. "Are you seriously trying to blame me for this?" She rolled her eyes. "I'm not doing this with you, Ethan. If you want to throw a tantrum, go ahead. I'm going to bed." And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding and my mind racing. After Claire stormed off to bed, I sat on the couch staring blankly at the darkened TV screen. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and confusion. How could she act so casually, so defiant? Most people would crumble under the weight of such an accusation, but not Claire. No, she treated it like I was the one out of line. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire and my father together. I imagined their stolen moments, the whispered secrets, the lies. By the time the sun came up, I was running on fumes, but one thing was clear. I needed more proof. Something undeniable. Claire left for work that morning with her usual smug attitude. She didn't say goodbye, didn't even glance in my direction. It was her way of punishing me for daring to question her. Once she was gone, I went straight for her laptop. She wasn't careless, I'll give her that. There was no incriminating folder, no emails that screamed affair. But then I remembered her cloud account. Claire loved taking pictures, photos of her food, her friends, her endless parade of spa days. She backed everything up automatically, and she'd given me the password ages ago when I helped her set it up. The account opened, and there it was, a hidden album titled Untitled. I clicked on it, my hands trembling. The first photo was innocent enough, a picture of Claire's hand holding a wine glass. But the next one? It was her and Roger. They were sitting together on a hotel balcony, her head resting on his shoulder. The city lights sparkled behind them, but all I could see was the betrayal. The timestamps told me the photo was taken 6 weeks ago, right around the time Claire had told me she was going on a girls' weekend. I scrolled through the album, each photo more damning than the last. There was one of them at dinner, her hand resting on his. Another of them in a park, laughing. And then the one that shattered me completely, a selfie of the two of them in bed. I felt a burning sensation rise in my chest, like my heart had been set on fire. I wanted to smash the laptop, throw it against the wall, anything to make the images go away. But I didn't. Instead, I saved the photos and emailed them to myself. By the time Claire got home that evening, I was ready. She walked through the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Still sulking?" she asked, dropping her bag on the counter. I didn't respond. I just stood there holding my phone. "What's that look for?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. I tapped the screen, opening the album of photos. "Explain this," I said, my voice low and steady. She glanced at the phone and froze. For a moment, her confident facade cracked. But then she snorted, crossing her arms. "You went through my stuff? Wow, Ethan. That's pathetic. Even for you? Pathetic?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're sleeping with my father, Claire. How do you even justify that?" She shrugged, the smug smile returning to her face. "You really want to do this right now?" "Fine. Yeah, I had an affair. So what? So what?" I could barely believe what I was hearing. "Do you even hear yourself? You betrayed me. You betrayed our marriage." Claire rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Don't act like we had some fairy tale romance. You're boring, Ethan. You're predictable." I needed excitement, and Roger. Well, he gave me that. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. "You're blaming me for this? You're the one who cheated. Maybe if you weren't so busy being a dull, uptight workaholic, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." She shot back, her voice dripping with venom. I took a step closer, my fists clenched. "This isn't just about us, Claire. This is about my father. You didn't just cheat. You tore apart my family." She laughed bitterly. "Oh, spare me the dramatic speech. Your dad's a grown man. He knew what he was doing. If you want to be mad at someone, be mad at him." Her complete lack of remorse made my blood boil. "Do you even care?" I asked. "About me? About what you've done?" "Care?" she said, her eyes narrowing. "I've spent years catering to your fragile ego, Ethan. And for what? So you can play the victim now? Get over yourself?" Her words were like daggers, cutting deeper with every syllable. But I refused to let her win. "You think this is over?" I said. "You think you could just walk away from this like it's no big deal?" She smirked. "What are you going to do? Tell everyone? Go ahead. I'm sure they'll all enjoy hearing about how pathetic you are." Her arrogance was staggering. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next day, I confronted Roger. This time, I didn't hold back. I showed him the photos, forced him to look at the damage he'd caused. He broke down, tears streaming down his face as he apologized over and over. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Ethan. Then why did you do it?" I demanded. He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, but he was too much of a coward to say it out loud. That night, I sat alone in our living room, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Claire was upstairs, acting like nothing had happened. Roger had gone silent, too ashamed to face me. I was trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by people who had destroyed everything I thought I knew. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Claire was still upstairs, sleeping as if the world hadn't been set on fire by her selfishness. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about my next move. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in my own home, walking on eggshells around a woman who clearly didn't give a damn about what she'd done. I needed to take control. Claire came downstairs around 9 a.m., dressed in her silk robe, her hair perfectly tousled as if she'd just stepped out of a magazine ad. She poured herself a cup of coffee, ignoring me entirely. "You've been quiet," she said finally, sipping from her mug. "Not plotting anything stupid, I hope." I leaned against the counter, my arms crossed. "I've been thinking, actually." "Oh." She raised an eyebrow, her tone dripping with condescension. "Do share." "I want you out," I said, my voice firm. She laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "You're adorable when you try to act tough. But let's be real, Ethan. This is my house, too. You're not getting rid of me that easily." "I'm serious, Claire," I said, my jaw tightening. "Pack your stuff and leave." Her smile faded, replaced by a steely glare. "And what makes you think you're in any position to give me orders?" "I have the photos," I said, pulling out my phone and holding it up for her to see. "And I'm not afraid to use them." Her eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." I shot back. "I'm done playing nice. You've lied to me, humiliated me, and destroyed my family. If you think I'm going to let you walk away from this unscathed, you don't know me at all." She set her coffee cup down with a sharp clink, her hands trembling slightly. "So what? You're going to show those pictures to everyone? Air our dirty laundry for the whole world to see? You think it'll make you look good?" "This isn't about looking good," I said. "It's about holding you accountable." Claire took a step closer, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "You're pathetic, Ethan. You can't handle the fact that I wanted more than what you could give me. So go ahead, send your little pictures. See what happens when your precious family finds out you couldn't keep your wife satisfied." Her words were like acid, but I refused to let her see how much they stung. "Keep pushing, Claire," I said. "Let's see how far you're willing to go." I spent the rest of the day avoiding her, retreating to my home office to plan my next move. I was done being reactive. It was time to take control of the narrative. I started by calling my sister, Megan. She'd always been the mediator in our family, the one who kept everyone grounded. If anyone would know how to handle this mess, it was her. "Megan," I said, my voice shaky, "I need to talk to you. It's about Claire and Dad." She was silent for a moment. "What about them?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "They've been involved. I found proof." Megan let out a sharp breath. "Are you serious?" "Ethan, this is insane." "Tell me about it," I said bitterly. "But I need your help. I can't handle this on my own." "I'll be there in an hour," she said. When Megan arrived, I showed her the photos. She stared at them in disbelief, her face a mix of anger and disgust. "I can't believe this," she said, shaking her head. "I knew Claire was trouble. But Dad? What the hell is wrong with him?" "That's the question of the day," I said. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But I can't just sit here and pretend everything's fine." Megan nodded. "We need to confront them. Both of them. Together." That evening, Megan and I sat Claire and Roger down in the living room. The tension was palpable, the air so thick with unspoken accusations it was hard to breathe. "What's this about?" Roger asked, his voice cautious. "You know exactly what this is about," Megan said, her eyes blazing with fury. Claire crossed her legs, leaning back on the couch with an air of defiance. "Oh, great. A family intervention. How original." "Cut the crap, Claire," I snapped. "We all know what's been going on." Roger looked down at his hands, his face pale. Claire, on the other hand, seemed completely unbothered. "So what?" she said. "You're mad. You've made that abundantly clear. Now what? Are we supposed to sit here while you yell at us like children? Do you even feel guilty?" Megan asked, her voice trembling. Claire smirked. "Guilty for what? Falling for someone who actually knows how to have fun? Sorry, but I'm not going to apologize for wanting more out of life." Roger finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Claire, stop." "What?" she said, rolling her eyes. "It's the truth. Ethan's a bore. Always has been. And you," she turned to Roger. "You're the only one who made me feel alive." The room went silent. Roger buried his face in his hands, and Megan looked like she was about to explode. "You're disgusting," Megan said, her voice trembling with rage. "Both of you. You've destroyed this family." Claire stood, brushing imaginary lint off her dress. "Spare me the morality lecture, Megan. This family was already a mess long before I came along." She turned to me, her expression cold. "You wanted the truth, Ethan? There it is. I don't love you. I never really did. So stop playing the victim and grow up." Her words hit like a sledgehammer, but I refused to let her see me break. "Get out," I said, my voice steady. She laughed, shaking her head. "Gladly." Claire grabbed her bag and walked out without looking back. As the door slammed shut, Roger finally looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he said. "I don't know what I was thinking." "Save it," I said coldly. "I don't want to hear it." Megan put a hand on my shoulder, her eyes filled with sympathy. "We'll get through this," she said softly. But as I stared at the empty space where Claire had been, I wasn't sure I believed her. The house felt emptier without Claire, even though her presence had long been a weight rather than a comfort. Megan stayed that night, claiming she didn't want me to be alone, but I knew she wanted to keep an eye on me. Not that I could blame her. My world had collapsed in less than 48 hours, and I wasn't handling it well. Roger hadn't left either. He sat in the den, nursing a drink and avoiding eye contact with anyone. I didn't have the energy to throw him out. I wanted him gone, sure, but after everything that had happened, I needed answers more than I needed space. The next morning, Megan cornered me in the kitchen. She was making coffee, her movements sharp and angry, like she was trying to burn off the frustration coursing through her veins. "So, what's the plan?" she asked, her voice clipped. I shrugged, leaning against the counter. "I don't know. I haven't exactly had time to think about it." "Well, you need to," she said, turning to face me. "This isn't just about Claire. Dad's part of this too, and you can't just let him off the hook." "I know that." I snapped, then immediately felt guilty. Megan wasn't the enemy here. "I'm sorry. I'm just lost." She softened, placing a hand on my arm. "I get it, Ethan, but you need to decide what you're going to do. Are you going to tell the rest of the family? Confront them both again? File for divorce? You can't just let this fester." I nodded, though I still didn't have any answers. Later that afternoon, I found Roger in the den. He looked terrible, his eyes bloodshot, his usually pristine appearance disheveled. It was strange seeing him like that. He'd always been the pillar of strength in our family, the one who had everything under control. Now he just looked broken. "We need to talk," I said, my voice flat. He nodded, setting his glass down on the coffee table. "I know." I sat across from him, my arms crossed. "Why, Dad? Why would you do this to me?" He let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples. "I don't have a good answer, Ethan. I wish I did." "That's not good enough," I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You were supposed to be the one I could trust. And Claire," I shook my head, struggling to find the words. "She's my wife, Dad. How could you?" Roger looked up at me, his expression pained. "It wasn't planned, Ethan. It just happened. We were talking one day, and what?" I interrupted. "You decided it'd be fun to destroy your son's marriage?" "No," he said quickly. "It wasn't like that. I know it's hard to believe, but I never wanted to hurt you. He paused, his voice breaking. "I made a mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake." "Yeah, you did," I said coldly. There was a long silence between us, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down like a heavy blanket. Finally, Roger spoke again. "What do you want me to do, Ethan? Tell me, and I'll do it." I stared at him, my mind racing. What did I want? For him to disappear? To fix the unfixable? Nothing seemed like enough. "I want you to tell the rest of the family," I said finally. "They deserve to know who you really are." Roger paled. "Ethan, please." "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to hide from this. You don't get to sweep it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen." He nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. "Okay, I'll tell them." That evening, Megan and I gathered the rest of the family at my parents' house. Roger looked like he was about to face a firing squad, but I didn't care. This was his mess, and he needed to own it. When everyone had arrived, my mom, my cousins, my aunt, and uncle, Roger stood in front of the room, his hands trembling. "I need to tell you all something," he began, his voice shaky. "Something I'm not proud of." He glanced at me, and I nodded, urging him to continue. I've been having an affair," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "With Claire." The room erupted. My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My aunt shouted something I couldn't make out over the din. Megan tried to calm everyone down, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water gun. My mom stood abruptly, her face pale. "How could you, Roger?" she demanded. "How could you do this to our family?" "I don't know," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't have an excuse." Save it," she snapped. "I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses." She turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, Mom," I said, my own voice trembling. The rest of the evening was a blur of shouting, tears, and accusations. By the time it was over, Roger was a shell of the man he once was, and our family was in tatters. When I got home that night, I sat alone in the dark, replaying everything in my mind. Claire was gone, my marriage was over, and my relationship with my father was irreparably damaged. But despite it all, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and there was no more pretending. Now all that was left was to figure out how to pick up the pieces. The days that followed felt like walking through the aftermath of a hurricane. My home was silent, stripped of Claire's biting voice and the pretense of a marriage that had been rotting from the inside. Roger tried reaching out several times, but I ignored him. My mother, devastated by the revelation, stayed with Megan, and the family was left fractured in ways that felt irreparable. Claire, on the other hand, stayed quiet. She hadn't contacted me since the night she walked out, and I hadn't tried to reach her. I filed for divorce the next day, unwilling to waste another second tethered to someone so toxic. But despite all the steps I was taking to move forward, the anger inside me refused to subside. A week later, I found myself parked outside a restaurant in Midtown. Claire was inside, sitting at a table near the window, with a glass of wine in her hand. She was laughing, her head tilted back, looking every bit the carefree woman I once thought I knew. But she wasn't alone. Roger sat across from her. His expression was somber, his shoulders slumped, but he was there. With her. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. After everything that had happened, after the chaos and pain they'd caused, they were still meeting? The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do as I stepped out of the car and walked into the restaurant. My heart was pounding, and my vision tunneled on the two of them. Claire noticed me first. Her eyes widened for a split second, but then she smiled, a smug, knowing smile that only fueled my rage. Well, she said as I approached the table. "Look who decided to join us." Roger turned, his face going pale. "Ethan." "Shut up," I snapped, glaring at him. "You don't get to talk." I turned to Claire, my voice low and icy. "You really can't help yourself? Can you? Wrecking one life isn't enough for you. You have to keep going." She raised an eyebrow, sipping her wine. "Oh, please. Spare me the theatrics. What are you doing here, Ethan? Hoping for some kind of dramatic confrontation? Newsflash. I don't care what you think." Her indifference was like gasoline on a fire. "You don't care?" I said, my voice rising. "You destroyed my marriage, tore apart my family, and you don't care?" She leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips. "You keep saying I destroyed everything. Maybe you should look in the mirror, Ethan. You were the one who let things fall apart." Before I could respond, Roger stood, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Ethan, please. Let's not do this here." I turned on him, my anger boiling over. "And you," I spat. "You're pathetic. You were supposed to be my father, my role model, and you threw it all away for her." Roger's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought he might actually break down. But Claire cut in before he could respond. "Oh, give it a rest, Ethan," she said, rolling her eyes. You're not some innocent victim in all this. You were a lousy husband, and your dad, well, let's just say he's more of a man than you'll ever be." The restaurant fell silent as her words hung in the air. Heads turned, and I could feel the weight of their stares. "You're unbelievable," I said, shaking my head. "You've lost everything, and you're still sitting here acting like you've won." She smiled, her eyes glinting with malice. "That's the difference between us, Ethan. I don't lose. I adapt. Maybe you should try it sometime." I walked out of the restaurant, my chest heaving with a mix of rage and disgust. The confrontation hadn't given me the closure I wanted. If anything, it made me realize just how little Claire and Roger cared about the wreckage they'd left behind. But as I drove home, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. I didn't need their remorse. I didn't need their apologies or explanations. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't ruining their lives, it was rebuilding my own. Over the next few months, I threw myself into that mission. Therapy helped, though it was a slow process. I found solace in reconnecting with friends I'd drifted away from during my marriage. Megan and I became closer than ever, leaning on each other as we worked to heal the fractures in our family. Roger moved out of town shortly after the restaurant incident, too ashamed to face the rest of the family. Claire, predictably, moved on to her next target, a wealthy attorney she'd likely drain dry before moving on again. And me? I finally felt free. 1 year later, I stood on the beach in Malibu, the waves crashing against the shore as I watched the sunset. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was mine again. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful.